Written by u/Carl 1961. Link in the description. People think I'm a serial killer. It's far worse than that. Part 3. The next 3 days each seemed to last a lifetime. I became anxious, impatient, like a kid on Christmas Eve night, knowing that Santa is on his way with his big sack of toys, or so I assumed a kid would feel. We never celebrated Christmas when I was a kid, being so poor we could barely pay our bills, let alone buy presents. Gradually, the pain in my head subsided to a dull ache. Each minute seemed to drag by for an hour because I had no way of telling time. Finally, the big day arrived. Dr. Steiner entered the room. "Are you ready?" he asked me. "Does the Pope wear a dress?" I said by way of answer, trying to be clever. Of course I was ready. I had been ready to see again since that long ago day when I had waken up in a different hospital to discover the world had been swallowed by blackness. "Very well, then. Please hold still while I remove the dressing." I did, feeling the pressure of his hand holding my head steady and the snicking of scissors as they cut through the gauze bound to the upper half of my head. My heart was pounding with anticipation. I couldn't breathe. The bandages were unwrapped layer by layer, the world becoming a little brighter with each barrier that was removed. Just before the last layer of gauze was removed, I closed my eyes. "All right. Open your eyes." For a moment I didn't even dare to do it. I had been awaiting this moment for days, so excited I could barely sleep. And now that it was here, I was scared shitless. "Open your eyes," Dr. Steiner repeated patiently. I did. The world flooded my vision, banishing the darkness I had existed in for most of my life. I gasped. I could see. For a moment I was so shocked I couldn't even react. Everything was so clear, so vivid. It was as if I had just been born and was seeing the world for the first time through the eyes of an infant. The hospital room was overwhelming, white and bright. Dr. Steiner stood before me, a distinguished-looking man in his mid-60s, older than I had originally thought, with rather shaggy salt and pepper hair and a full, well-manicured beard. He had a kind face and intelligent, thoughtful eyes. I looked at him as if I were seeing the face of God. "Well?" he asked me, expectantly. "I can see," I told him in a hushed voice of total awe. He smiled, beaming with satisfaction and pride. "Congratulations. I want to go outside. I want to see the world." "Very well, but you'll have to go in a wheelchair," he said, and summoned a nurse to bring one and help move me into it. I was still kind of weak from the surgery. He wheeled me out of the room and down a corridor. I took in everything we passed on the way, amazed at even the simplest detail: the polished tile floor, the lime green walls, the fluorescent light fixtures burning overhead. Everything seemed to gleam, seemed to have an almost three-dimensional sheen to it. He took me through a set of double doors and into the lobby of the main hospital. We approached the main entrance and I could see sunlight flooding in through the windows. Sunlight. The first sunlight I had seen after 20 long years of endless night. He pushed a button to open the handicap-accessible automatic door and wheeled me outside. I sat there, looking around, my heart soaring with childish wonder and joy. A placid medical school campus lay before me, white modern buildings dotting a rich green landscape. The sky overhead was a bright pale blue spotted with clouds. Everything seemed much bigger than it actually was, everything seemed huge. Everything was clearly defined, the straight lines and angles of the buildings, the leaves of the maple trees, the texture of the bark. Medical students and staff walked here and there. My brain absorbed the colors of the clothes they were wearing, colors I had almost forgotten even existed. For a moment I felt as if my brain was going to freeze up with sensory overload. It was also overwhelming, also incredibly beautiful. I realized I was weeping. Dr. Steiner placed his hand on my shoulder. "Welcome back," he told me. "Thank you," I whispered. I was kept at the medical school hospital for another month to recover from my brain surgery. And so Dr. Steiner and his colleagues could run a battery of tests to see how well I adjusted to being able to see again. They prepped me for life on the outside, explaining to me how the world had changed in the time I had been blind, told me what I was to expect once I left the hospital. They explained to me how I would have to find a residence of my own and then find a job, teaching me the ins and outs of making my way in the world, how I would have to open a bank account, get a social security card, pay bills and rent, file taxes. They helped me catch up on my education some, too, since I was still basically at the same second grade reading and writing level I had been at before I went blind, despite what my grandparents, who hadn't been too well educated themselves, had tried to teach me after I went to live with them. They told me there were classes I could take after I was discharged to help improve my literacy skills, and gave me several numbers and websites I could visit. For me, probably the most incredible experience was finally seeing my own face in a mirror for the first time. I was stunned. The scrawny little 8-year-old I dimly remembered was long gone. The face of a 28-year-old man looked back at me, my sandy brown hair, which had been shaved in back for my surgery, rather long and unkempt. A beard covered my lower face. I was deeply tanned from being outside for so long and gaunt from malnutrition. I sat there for several minutes in mute shock, peering into my own pale blue eyes reflected back at me in the mirror Dr. Steiner held for me. I looked at Dr. Steiner. "Can I get a shave and a haircut?" "I think that can be arranged," he replied. Afterwards, I took my first real shower, not including the one I had been given before surgery, in ages, reveling blissfully in the feeling of the warm spray of water. I felt like I was in heaven. Occasionally, I had pounding headaches and bolts of sharp pain would pierce my eyes. Dr. Steiner explained that this was perfectly normal and that it was my eyes still adjusting to being able to see again. He gave me painkillers for these episodes when they became too unbearable. I felt it was a small price to pay for the gift I had been given, the gift so many of us take for granted. I watched a lot of TV and movies on the TV in my room, and was given a laptop so I could search the internet, which had just been starting to take off when I went blind, catching up with all the current pop culture trends and celebrities who had risen, and subsequently fallen, in some cases, since I had been 8. I also caught up on all the current technological advances I had missed out on, such as YouTube, smartphones and Facebook. Everything seemed to be happening too fast, seemed unreal. I wondered if all of this might just be a dream and any second I would wake up cold and hungry, lost once again in the blackness of my own private hell. It all seemed too good to be true. I would soon find out it was. One afternoon, not long before I was discharged, I was out on the campus, just sitting on a bench, enjoying the spring sunshine, still enthralled with my newly returned vision. A pretty blonde female med student in her early 20s was jogging down a path in front of me. Something else I had recently discovered was women. I had long since hit puberty, but being blind, I hadn't truly been able to appreciate the female form in all its wonders until just lately. I was incredibly horny all the time. Especially after being exposed, in more ways than one, to the likes of Salma Hayek, Halle Berry and Angelina Jolie in some of the movies I had seen on TV. Sex education was something else I needed to be caught up on. I took a moment to enjoy the sight of her lithe, athletic young figure clad in spandex shorts and a tank top in motion before me. I started to get an erection and quickly covered it with my hand, trying to do so casually. She spotted me and shot me a quick, friendly smile. For a split second, her face seemed to change. A ripple of distortion seemed to pass over her attractive features, the way the flat surface of a pond will ripple if you drop a pebble into it. I thought I glimpsed something else, something beneath her face. I couldn't tell what it was. She was moving, so it was a blur, but it looked like a patch of blackness with 2 bright spots of red in it. Just as quickly as it had happened, her face returned to normal, and she had passed me, her back to me as she continued jogging down the path. I was shocked, puzzled, and pretty damn frightened by what had just happened. I told Dr. Steiner about it when I went back inside, but he just reassured me that it was quite common for people who were recovering from brain surgery to experience visual and auditory hallucinations early on. Especially when the part of the brain in question was the part that controlled sight. It could also be a side effect of the pain medication I had been taking. He told me it was nothing to worry about and that it should pass in time. I trusted his judgment, him being the professional, and let it go, and for a while I believed he was right. I didn't experience anything else like that during the rest of my stay at the campus hospital. The horror started 6 months later. I left the hospital a few days later with some new clothes and a few essentials Dr. Steiner had bought to help me get started with my new life. He shook my hand and wished me the best of luck, and I thanked him again for everything he had done for me. It was a hell of a lot more than most people had ever done for me my whole life. I had some basic toiletries, toothbrush, razor, shampoo, etc., along with my new clothes in an inexpensive duffel bag. I also had a check written in the amount of $20,000, which I soon deposited in the checking account I opened at a local bank that same day, in my pocket. Next I went about looking for a place to call home, a real home all of my very own. I found a relatively cheap apartment in the city and made my first rent payment, plus a security deposit. It wasn't much, just one medium-sized room with a bed, table, kitchenette and a small bathroom. But after my years of being homeless, it was like a penthouse apartment. A place where I could be warm and feel safe, and wouldn't have to worry about freezing to death in the middle of January. The next 5 months were without a doubt the happiest of my life, maybe even the only truly happy time in my whole miserable life. I quickly found a job bagging groceries at a supermarket. It was the best I could do with my limited education and lack of skills, but it was better than nothing, and even made something I had never had before, a few friends. They also worked at the supermarket. Sometimes we'd get together after work at a bar to toss back a few and shoot the shit. I even started to flirt with a cute cashier named Nikki who was almost a decade younger than me. Given time, we might have even become a couple, but things didn't work out that way. I was taking online classes at night to build upon my education, hoping I could eventually go for my GED. I even took a road test and got my driver's license, something I had never expected to be able to do, and used some of the money I had been given to purchase a halfway decent used car. I was still marveling at the miraculous return of my long-lost sight, and anytime I was downtown I was amazed at how huge the city was, how tall the buildings were, how many people and vehicles there were, how fast things moved in the sighted world where you didn't have to grope around, feeling your way through the darkness, scared of what obstacles might be waiting in front of you, careful not to trip over anything in your path. People walked briskly and confident, secure in their visual ability, unaware of how easily it could be snatched away from them. Most of all, I was amazed at how colorful and bright the world was. Sometimes I would just stand in amazement, watching the sun glint off the glass of the towering skyscrapers, while people passing by gave me strange looks. Sometimes I'd sit in the park and watch the sunset, which had never seemed as glorious to me as a kid as it did then, after I had learned to truly appreciate being able to see it. For a while I thought I actually had a real chance of leading a normal life, of being able to fit in, and be accepted by society at last, for the first time in my life. Then, about 5 months after my surgery, the headaches returned. Minor at first, they gradually increased over the next few weeks into excruciating pounding migraines that left me nearly paralyzed in bed, unable to do anything. They were much worse than the ones I had experienced while recovering from my surgery in the hospital. My eyes hurt too, throbbing in their sockets, my vision occasionally becoming blurry and even doubled, like everything I saw was a double exposure of a photograph. Sometimes I saw flashes of bright light that seemed to fill my entire head, blotting out everything else. I missed several days of work and was threatened with the loss of my job, pathetic as it was. I was terrified, wondering if I was experiencing some kind of setback, if maybe my brain was starting to reject the surgery, or something, and I was about to go blind again. I even wondered if I might be developing a brain tumor. I went to a doctor about my problem, who referred me to an ophthalmologist who could find nothing wrong with my eyes. I even went back to Dr. Steiner and told him what was going on. He had me returned to the hospital where they ran a CAT scan of my brain, but once again, there was nothing apparently wrong with me. He told me it was probably just a belated effect of the procedure I had undergone, and told me that some patients experience infrequent headaches for years after brain surgery. He prescribed some painkillers for me, which took the edge off the agony, but never fully erased it. I was, just barely, able to function again, and returned to my job at the supermarket. Then, about a month after the headaches had begun, they abruptly ceased. I was relieved, thinking things had gone back to normal. They hadn't. I would soon find out things had changed for the worst. One early evening, in mid-October, I was driving home from my shift and was stopped by a red light at a crosswalk. I sat there idling, not thinking about anything in particular, while a stocky middle-aged businessman in a designer suit, clutching an expensive briefcase in one hand and arguing loudly to someone on the smartphone he was holding in the other, crossed in front of me. I watched him without much interest, wondering half seriously if he might be the same self-important asshole who had told me to drop dead last spring, just before Dr. Steiner had come into my life. Still ranting on his phone, he threw me a passing glance, and his face changed. I froze in my seat, my hands involuntarily clutching the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It was the same thing that I had seen happen to the girl jogging, only this time, his face didn't return to normal after a second as hers had. It was as if once my brain had registered the change, it became permanent, like my brain wouldn't allow my eyes to unsee it. I saw what lay hidden beneath his normal face. It was like a patch of thick black shadow covering where his face should have been. Thick, featureless shadow, in which two bright points of red light glowed, like embers in the ashes of a fire. Two red, burning, inhuman eyes. Then he was on the other side of the street, and gone. I sat there even after the light had turned green, my heart racing, my mind reeling. What the fuck had just happened?